title of my talk, as you can see, is Selective Structures, the Multimodal Shaping of Post-Welfarism in Factual Welfare Television. If any of those terms are unfamiliar, I hope they'll become more familiar in the next 40 minutes. One sec. So the post-reality TV documentary Benefit Street was a show that did little more than follow people around who were living in poverty. Yet it somehow became the unexpected hit of British TV in 2014. It also provides the data for my talk today. It focused on unemployed people living on social security benefits. And these are payments made by the state to people who cannot work for whatever reason. Benefits in the UK has a similar meaning and a negative kind of connotation as welfare in the US, but welfare is used more positively in the UK as in the welfare state, which includes much loved institutions such as the National Health Service. The show was filmed on James Turner Street in a deprived part of Birmingham, which is Britain's second largest city. It was hugely controversial and quite polarizing. And it also caused divisions among the participants. The most prominent cast member, nicknamed White D, you can see her on the left there, in two pictures. She blamed these divisions on the way the footage was edited for TV. So this paper explores the editing and the other changes made by Love Productions when recontextualizing the cast members' lives into Benefit Street. I take a multimodal critical discourse studies approach. I'll call that MCDS from now on. And I ask how might representations of James Turner Street reflect and shape understandings of post-welfarism. I'm defining post-welfarism as a neoliberal ideology, which views the Keynesian, as in John Maynard Keynes, the economist, Keynesian social democratic welfare state as redundant or counterproductive. I argue that the program selectively represents two social structures of benefits and street as causing the residents' poverty. And as the broader political economy of 2014 Britain is overlooked, those two smaller scale structures appear to be causing the residents' poverty. As an outline, I'm going to talk about social class in reality TV, and then social structures, then neoliberal austerity, then the data for the talk, which is Benefit Street Series 1, Episode 3, then MCDS as an analytical approach. My analysis is broken into two sections. The first I call a place of benefits, and the second is the generation of poverty on the street. Obviously, then I'll discuss and conclude at the end. So social class in reality TV. Reality TV is a genre in which ordinary people are continuously filmed, and it's designed to be entertaining rather than informative. I use the OED there, Oxford English Dictionary, to define it because not many people actually do define it when they discuss it. And I think that is quite a helpful definition. So in terms of Benefit Street, the genre is, Fisher calls it a post-reality TV documentary. Now, what he means by that, he explains, is that it essentially operates under a reality TV ethos, but is dressed up under a serious documentary aesthetic. And this could be problematic, right? Because it means that viewers may think they're getting a more serious examination of poverty and welfare than they actually get. So they may expect it to be informative, but you know, it is perhaps ultimately entertainment. For the content, we call this factual welfare television. Its critics actually, in journalists in particular, called it poverty porn. I prefer the term factual welfare television because I find it a bit less sort of sensational, let's say. So I'll first talk more generally about social class in reality TV, and then factual welfare television as a specific form of class-focused reality TV. Okay, so reality TV, according to Wood and Skeggs, is a neoliberal entertainment product where the lack of personal historical context means the participants' failures and sometimes successes are coded as purely individual rather than structurally influenced. Class divisions are reinforced by using ordinary people as stars and judging them as lacking via a normatively middle-class gaze. Unsurprisingly, this middle-class gaze was most apparent in factual welfare television. So you see three examples here. Benefit Street was the most popular, but there were many more. Jensen argues that the anti-benefits mood of the early 2010s in the UK was reflected in and further shaped by factual welfare television. Benefit Street has been studied by linguists and discourse analysts, people like Baker and McHenry, etc. But Patterson et al. Call for critical study of its representations of poverty and welfare. So actually nobody has critically or multimodally analysed its representations. So I'm responding to Patterson et al.'s call. But the critical multimodal study of social class discourse has been done with other reality TV shows. So Eriksson and Machin analysed the multimodal delegitimation and ridiculing of the working classes in Swedish reality TV. We see three examples here. These and the previous studies tend to see these shows as stigmatising and individualising, that is, seeing them as avoiding questions of structure. The current study shifts the focus onto how certain social structures, like, for example, social security benefits and local community, are foregrounded and are shown as harming the sometimes stigmatized but often humanized participants. To just go through social structures, Birkenstedt's described them as emerging from individual actions as those actions are patterned across time and across persons. Some are very easily nominalized and recognized. They include things like PolyU, FC Barcelona, the Jones family, and Cairo. Others, such as the working class or the alt-right, they're recognizable, but they're more difficult to delineate. They don't have institutional status or offices or things like that. Others still are invisible without careful attention. And I think, for example, the glass ceiling would be an example of that. And I think MCDS is well equipped to identify and explore discursive manifestations of these kind of invisible structures. To talk about the context for Benefit Street, neoliberal economics, it is argued, resulted in the 2008 financial crisis, which leads to economic austerity and the deepest cuts ever made in social provision in the UK. And then the problem of this bleak economic and lower income employment climate, including the highest rates of in-work poverty ever, was transformed through what Clark and Newman call the alchemy of austerity into issues of welfare dependence, cultures of entitlement, and irresponsibility. I think essentially it was that the responsibility and blame got put on the poor for a crisis that they did not cause. At this stage, it's worth asking, why do some areas of a rich country like Britain, for example, the West Midlands, which is where Benefit Street is set, South Wales, which is where I'm from, and Teesside, which is where the second season of Benefit Street was set, why do these areas have such persistently high unemployment and poverty? And it wasn't always so. In the 1970s, with well-paid, secure industrial jobs, Teesside was, for example, the third most prosperous local economy in the UK. And MacDonald et al., sociologists, they argue that the rise in unemployment was not due to a sudden epidemic of laziness, but instead it was more about how global forces and national policies combined to spell the rapid deindustrialization of places and how this brought about the economic dispossession of the working class. So my argument, just to reiterate it, is that Benefit Street selectively foregrounds the structures of benefits, that is dependency on social security, and street, that is a restrictive local community, while overlooking the wider and arguably more impactful political economic structures of austerity, social security cuts, and the wider post-industrial context. So the data, as you should know now, is the first is Benefit Street. It's one episode. The first series of Benefit Street, as I just said, was set in Birmingham, and the second was in Teesside. It focused on the day-to-day lives of unemployed residents in deprived neighbourhoods, and the episode studied was the most popular of both series. I got 6.5 million viewers on TV and 2.3 on YouTube. This 45-minute episode deals with the theme of children and parenting. So before we start the analysis, I'm just going to go through my analytical approach, which is, I've said, is MCDS. Kress and Van Leeuwen argue that all the communicative modes deployed in a multimodal text contribute to meaning. Multimodal MCDS involves closely and critically examining how, on a particular occasion, in a particular text, certain discourses and ideologies are carried by those different modes. Ideological discourses are not only found in political rhetoric and news media, but also in everyday entertainment, David Matchin argues. So that's why we're looking at Benefit Street. Before I just want to talk about three, because to explore the multiple modes that make up the episode, I examine its main tracks, which are verbal, visual, and sound. So I'll just talk about those three briefly. So the verbal track is made up of two main forms of speech. There's the voiceover, and then there's the cast members' utterances. So the voiceover is extra diegetic, meaning it is added in post-production and spoken by an unseen narrator who exists outside the narrative world and often comments on, well, mostly comments on the narrative world. That was scripted by the producers, Love Productions. The cast members' utterances are diegetic, so they're unscripted, and they are the narrative world, they exist within the narrative world, but they are heavily rearranged when edited into the final episodes, which obviously the cast members, when I say cast members, I mean the residents of the street, they don't have any control over the editing process. So I argue that Love Productions, in Goffmanian terms, are ultimately the authors of the text. And I would say that the cast members would be animators. For the visual track, it's mostly moving images. And I'm analysing it using Kress and Van Leeuwen's grammar of visual design. An example of a concept from them is information value. So as Western scripts read from left to right, so they argue that Western visual design tends to place common sense given information on the left and new or contestable information on the right. Also, the lower part of the page tends to deal with the real or down to earth, and the upper with the ideal or generalized essence, what they call its ostensibly most salient part. As we see with
there's no sound, Dr. Daly, we can't hear you.
Okay, sorry, wait, just give me 1 second. I think something is up here. Let me turn this off. Let me try that again, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so if we look at the lamp, that would be in the real, the given position, and then the genie, if we read it from left to right, the genie emerges from the lamp and is in the kind of contestable part, but is also, you know, the generalized essence. It's the most salient part of the picture. what's interesting is if we look at a YouTube page, it's kind of, it has similarities with that. So you've got the page, the most salient part is obviously the video, which is what the page is named after. And then you've got the down to earth, the kind of the vernacular comments at the bottom. And then the new would be the next videos that it suggests. And as you see, it suggests mostly factual welfare television for me. What I would also say is that these are not hard and fast rules, obviously. There are plenty of counterexamples. Cress and Van Leeuwen's point is that, as with the grammar of language, any variation will be held up and kind of judged against the normative structure. We may just see a design as somehow odd if it doesn't conform to these norms. So for the soundtrack, it's mostly instrumental music, which is a mode that, you know, actually can communicate discourses of power, agency, and social positioning. But music is much more open to interpretation than speech, writing, or image, and that makes the analyst's job harder. However, context and experience, Van Leeuwen argues, can help us interpret the meaning potentials of musical sound. So context, in the sense that music often occurs alongside other modes like speech and image, and in certain genres, and these can help us interpret the musical meaning potentials. And experience, in the sense that certain musical sounds fit with certain embodied activities. So for example, we play a lullaby for a child at bedtime and electronic dance music in a club, and not vice versa. So these are my transcripts. They include the verbal, the visual, and the sound tracks, and you'll see them as we go along. The line numbers can refer to all three tracks. So line 9 could be the utterance, the image, or the key change, the musical key change. Where you see Hurst, that's Tony Hurst, the voiceover narrator. And where we see R1, R2, and 3, they're unnamed residents of the street. Okay. So the first analysis is called A Place of Benefits, and that explores the program's title sequence and asks how it presents James Turner Street as a place of benefits, while suggesting that benefits are a demotivating social structure. The title sequence is important because, as Goffman says, it sets the stage and frames what follows, and thus guides viewers' interpretations of the show itself. It was also the most repeated part of the show. So before I play this video, I just would like you to, I'm going to play the whole opening sequence. It's almost 2 minutes, but I'm going to play it all. And I'd just like you to watch and notice anything you think might be relevant across the 3 tracks. I'll then play much shorter extracts and analyze those. Okay. Just you have to bear with me 1 second while I get the video ready. Okay.
Unemployed, unemployed, unemployed.
You see this street here? James Turner Street was one of the best streets.
Unemployed, unemployed.
No, one of the worst.
James Turner Street in Birmingham is not your average street. There are 99 houses, 13 nationalities, and most of the residents
Penny for the poor.
are claiming benefits.
Probably 5% of people on this road that are working.
But times are getting tougher.
Housing benefit is going to get cut. What kind of nonsense is that?
They're having to learn to get by on less
How are we supposed to live on £50 a week?
and rely on each other more.
If the council won't come and pick it up, we'll do it ourselves. Some guy!
It's mad. It's just like one great big family.
Is there any point?
Don't talk to me.
Is there any point?
Do not
Is
talk
there any point?
to me.
I don't think you could ever meet anything any more dysfunctional.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, send me down a couple of bob.
Over the course of a year, through good times and bad.
Move on!
Life on James Turner Street
I've never lived without my kids, ever.
would be challenged like never before.
It's not all about money. You could have all the money in the world and have nothing compared to what we've got round here.
That's our road.
Okay. So I'm going to play a shorter extract from that opening sequence now. And this time it's after 18 seconds, just as Hurst, the voiceover, begins to introduce the street. Please listen out for a musical key and mode change just after the resident says wanker. Okay, again.
James Turner Street in Birmingham is not your average street. There are 99 houses, 13 nationalities,
Yeah, wanker.
and most of the residents
Penny for the poor.
are claiming benefits.
Okay, so I will just read my analysis for this section. So extract 1 begins ambiguously, and then the tone becomes more negative, and then it finally taps into benefit scrounger discourses. Scrounger meaning beggar, and used as a pejorative term for benefits claimants. The ambiguous part here is James Turner Street is not your average street. Then it becomes more negative. We hear that it's like a jail. There's tension between the native residents and incoming migrants is hinted at, where we hear 13 nationalities and yeah, wanker. And the background music supports this increasing tension. We switch from a C-sharp Dorian, so C-sharp key Dorian mode, to a B Aeolian. The Dorian mode has a bright raised sixth, which the Aeolian lacks. And this move into a gloomier musical context fits Hurst's final utterance that most of the residents are claiming benefits. Despite actually most British people claiming benefits, if we include state pensions and child benefit, the clip of 2 working age adults sitting on a sofa in daytime claiming poverty suggests the stricter, more stigmatized meaning of benefits as handouts for the unemployed. The alfresco sofa positions its occupiers as comfortable outcasts, and penny for the poor is reminiscent of 19th century street beggars, and places the couple and perhaps the residents in general in the Victorian role of undeserving poor. And now I'll show you another short extract.
But times are getting tougher.
Housing benefit is going to get cut. What kind of nonsense is that?
They're having to learn to get by on less
How are we supposed to live on £50 a week?
and rely on each other more.
If the council won't come and pick it up, we'll do it ourselves.
Okay. Okay, and again, the music here matches the verbal track in that a beat arrives just as we learn that times are getting tougher. And also the visual and verbal tracks suggest that benefits is a restrictive social structure. This happens here through a quickfire repeated pattern of A, B, C. So A is where Hurst says in an ambiguous, decontextualized way that benefits will be cut. And then a cast member complains, that's B. And then a more active cast member appears. So pattern 1 would be lines 2 to 5, where we learn that times are getting tougher. And then Charlene complains her housing benefit is going to get cut. And then we see this more autonomous, motivated character dragging the vacuum down the road, even with a broken leg. Then we learn that they're having to learn to get by on less, lines 6 and 7. Then Mark complains, how are we supposed to live on £50 a week? And then a more autonomous sort of self-starting Mark appears and wants to clean up the rubbish. So there's a very stark contrast in attitude between the complaining and the active figures. And I think the meaning potential here could be that benefits cause entitlement, cuts cause immediate resentment, but in the long run, produce more motivated agents. The second pattern includes visuals of cast members smoking and drinking, which suggests the beneficial nature of the cuts. I mean, means less alcohol and tobacco. And that is emphasized by really clearly zooming in on the beer can there in line 8, which is a version of Skegg's, what she calls reality TV's judgment shot. Okay, and I'm going to show you the last clip for just a few seconds from the opening sequence. Please consider the music this time.
That's a road.
Okay. So, wait, sorry. The final shot cements James Turner Street as a place characterized by benefits. Firstly, we have a daytime shot of a visibly drunk resident nicknamed Fungi with two friends dressed in urban sportswear like stereotypical chavs, which is a pejorative slang term for a certain kind of white working class person. And ending the sequence with a shot of Fungi and friends drunk and swearing in daylight, claiming that JTS is their fucking road, sets up a connection thus. Ultimately, this street belongs to these kinds of people who dress like chavs and spend their days drinking. It also suggests that these stereotypical semiotics and behaviors will continue into the impending episode. The soundtrack emphasizes this as the music refuses cadence. There's this odd note at the end where it refuses cadence, which is a promise, Van Leeuwen argues, that there is more to come. What is not mentioned here, and is only fully revealed in a follow-up film released after the series, is that Fungi was raped twice as a teenager and agrees that, in his words, agrees that this may have been part of the reason I went off the rails and didn't do what I should have. I tell you this just to demonstrate the added understanding that wider context can bring. Also, he sadly died from a suspected drug overdose in 2019. So overall, you know, his life was a lot more complex, difficult, and tragic than this clip would suggest. Finally, the textual overlay Benefit Street appears above the James Turner Street sign, 4 times larger, also in capitals. This literally brands the street as a place of benefits, which is the most prominent word in the upper central position of the screen. Returning to Kress and Van Leeuwen, the title's position and size gives it maximal salience. The original street sign is in the given and real positions, and Benefit Street is new and gives us the generalized essence of the location. This redesignates the street as a place of benefits while suggesting that this shot of Fungi and friends is typical, not just of the street, but of benefits claimants more broadly. Okay, and now the second analysis. I'm going to show you a full scene from the show, from the episode, and I look at how the structure of street is portrayed as trapping its younger residents, suggesting that the local community generates its own poverty. I'm going to give you some context for this one before we start, because it's from the middle of the episode. So the extract begins with Fungi's drunken friend wearing a blue plastic bag on his head, chanting a Birmingham City Football Club song. Then he and Fungi, as you can see here, are sitting on the doorstep, drinking and smoking. And it seems that prior to the scene, Fungi has slightly burned his friend's face with a flaming aerosol can. 5-year-old Gerard on the right there approaches them on his bike, and they start to chat. The two intoxicated friends argue about the injury and how often they see their children. Shots from a talking head interview with Gerard's mother, Dee, are spliced into this scene where she expresses concern about Gerard's future. And also just tell you a little bit of kind of UK-centric vocabulary. So they mention Lynx, which is a brand of deodorant. They mention a spliff, which is a cannabis or marijuana cigarette. And when Dee says he thought it was broccoli at first, what she is saying is that when Gerard saw cannabis in its plant form, he thought it was broccoli, but now he knows that it's a drug. When you watch this, this scene, please consider the editing of the two scenes together and the effects this might have. Also, how Gerard, the boy, is shown as observing the two men via different camera angles. Any contrasts in color you notice, and also what you think the music at the beginning and the end could be signifying or connoting. So,
Fucking blue army. You blue. You like, you fucking diamond. Yeah, I do.
White D's son Gerard has spent the whole 5 years of his life on James Turner Street.
I think he's more streetwise than his sister, and that's scary.
No links and things like that.
Yeah,
You do, you spray that. You put your light underneath it.
He knows way too much for a 5-year-old. You know what I mean? And that's just from being riding up and down the road on his bike.
Don't give a fuck. I've got to see my kids as well, and you've done that to me.
How often do you see
Look
your
at that.
kids?
I'm seeing them later.
Well, how often do you see your kids?
It doesn't make a difference.
Yeah, it fucking does. Don't even go there, Chad.
He'll know what a cigarette is. He knows what a spliff is. He's gone from, like, calling it broccoli. He used to think it was broccoli at first.
Yeah, I can stroke that, man. You smoke it, look.
All right, man. Twos, yeah.
What, you think you're going to get twos off me now?
I have thought, what is there for him? Is it destined that he'll just grow up and he'll be part of a gang? Because that's society, isn't it?
Okay, so I think this scene illustrates how the transformation, which Van Leeuwen and Wodak call rearrangement, can be used to great effect when recontextualizing social practice. In this case, when the social practice of living on James Turner Street was recontextualized into a factual welfare television program. Editing these words alongside this street scene legitimizes her concerns. Firstly, she worries that Gerard is more streetwise than his teenage sister, and that this comes from riding up and down the road on his bike. Evidence for her concerns is spliced into her words as Gerard sits on his bike while Fungi teaches him how to make an aerosol flamethrower. The men's argument about how often they see their children keeps the intergenerational theme central. As Dee explains that Gerard no longer innocently assumes that cannabis is broccoli and now knows what drugs and cigarettes are, we see a 5-second shot of Gerard looking the men up and down as they argue over a cigarette. Next, we see the men from Gerard's point of view, and both shots encourage us to ask how his young mind is processing this information. In their seminal ethnography, Sennett and Cobb found that the working class father doesn't ask the child to take the parents' lives as a model, but as a warning, meaning that the fathers hope their children will experience social mobility that they themselves did not. Whether Gerard sees the men as a model or a warning is unclear, but they are certainly presented as a questionable influence on him. So combining the street scene with Dee's maternal concerns for her son's future sets the scenes in a dialectic relationship. The street scene is evidence of her concerns, and her concerns are evidence that the street scene is typical, not cherry-picked. Colour and music do extra work to suggest a troubled future for Gerard. Fungi and Friend are dressed in greys and blues and almost blend into the street. Gerard is partly dressed in the same grey as Fungi, but he's strikingly differentiated from both men by his bright warm reds and oranges. And I wonder, could this be connoting a kind of energetic fire of youth destined to burn out and leave Gerard in Fungi's street-like grey? These meaning potentials are supported by the music, which starts as a repetitive, harsh beat with an abrasive guitar sound. It's a loop with no progression, just repetition. Bringing all this together, Gerard is different from the two men dressed colourfully, too young to be guilty. His mother expressed concerns in a separate interview. Juxtaposing her maternal worries over this scene could give the impression that, yes, Gerard is different now, but over time will be drawn into the stasis that the cyclical loop of the music signifies as poverty and failure generate themselves. Towards the end, Dee asks if Gerard's destiny is to be part of a gang. And the last shot shows Gerard not with the older drinkers, but with Callum, a peer whose behavioural problems dominate the episode. The music returns at this point, repeating once, then breaking out and ending on another high, non-cadential note. And this musical breakout seems to bring the progression that was absent beforehand. But it's a progression from the older generation's addictions to alcohol and cigarettes to the next generation's urban gangs with the associations of harder drugs and violence that they bring. Finally, the producers chose to add a Twitter hashtag to this controversial segment, which invites viewers to publicly judge the participants. So to summarize, analysis 1, I argue that the title sequence combines music, voiceover, image, and textual overlay to suggest that the street is characterized by the demotivating structure of benefits. And analysis 2, I argue that the street is multimodally portrayed as a place which traps its young, thus generating its own poverty. And the selective representations of these two restrictive structures are fairly typical of the episode. For example, for benefits, for a frustrating benefits system, early in the episode, we see a frustrated, directionless Mark exiting the job centre, which I see as a metonym for the welfare system, angrily mouthing expletives. Later, however, we see Mark wearing a suit with purpose as he performs his new impossibly precarious charity collections role, the grinding conditions of which are barely acknowledged, let alone discussed. And then for Street, Hurst, the voiceover, tells us twice that James Turner Street has lots of single parents. And as one of Fungi's very drunk friends stumbles over the road, shouting at some children, the voiceover sarcastically notes that kids learn a lot about life from the grown-ups of James Turner Street. So just to discuss and conclude, crucially, while these social structures of benefits and street are foregrounded, Birmingham's post-industrial context is never mentioned, and austerity and welfare reforms are referenced only in passing. Thus, the problems become not neoliberal austerity, in-work poverty, post-industrial regional inequalities, and extreme social security retrenchment, but benefits and the street. And if social security and the local community are the problems, then individualistic, non-redistributive, post-welfarism, I would argue which is surely no friend of the poor, becomes a compassionate solution to those apparently trapped in these selectively foregrounded structures. Just to finish with the contributions, the paper contributes to the literature, firstly, by undertaking the first detailed critical multimodal analysis of the show and showing how it achieves its ideological meaning potentials. Secondly, this renders the findings potentially useful when critically analysing other multimodal texts. It also complicates the common assertion that factual welfare television and reality TV are individualising and avoid questions of social structure. As we've seen, the programme does emphasise social structures, albeit in a selective manner. And this is something future FWT or RTV researchers may want to explore. Finally, I find that the show's post-welfare effects are perhaps achieved more through humanising its subjects than stigmatising them. Clearly, there are stigmatising elements to it. For example, we just saw the filming and broadcasting of very intoxicated people. But ultimately, a subtle blend of multimodal discourse shows us people without hope, apparently caught in the brambles of social security and restrictive community, and therefore individualistic post-welfarism becomes the obvious solution. This appeal to human compassion may well exert more influence than a predominantly stigmatizing text could. And this tension between sympathy and stigma is something that future researchers of social class media discourse might want to explore. That's the end of my talk. Thank you for listening. I just want to say a big thank you to Adam Iworski and Brooke Bolander for their insightful comments on the work that became this presentation, and the two anonymous reviewers at Social Semiotics for their helpful feedback. And thanks also to Love Productions for helping with the image rights request. There's a lot of references because it's a published paper. I'm going to flick through them quickly because this will be on the department's YouTube channel, so you could source any reference that you need by pausing it there. You could also just email me if you can't find anything. Thanks very much.